The rain hammered against my apartment windows in downtown Seattle like bullets on metal, each drop a reminder that October had arrived with its usual vengeance. I sat hunched over my animation desk, the glow from 3 monitors casting blue light across my tired face. My fingers moved across the drawing tablet with practiced precision, bringing life to Noctis Nova's latest performance. The virtual concert was scheduled to stream in 6 hours to 2 million fans worldwide, and I still had 3 scenes left to render. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. It buzzed again, then again. "Damn it," I muttered, glancing at the screen. 17 missed calls from the same number. A number I hadn't seen in over 7 years. Tia Rosa. My great-aunt's voice cracked through the speaker when I finally answered, each word heavy with the weight of news I wasn't prepared to hear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mijo, it's your grandfather, Eduardo. He passed away last night. The stylus slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. Outside, the rain seemed to pause, as if the world itself had taken a breath. "Nico, are you there?" I was 26 years old, and I hadn't spoken to my grandfather in 7 years. Not since the night he looked me in the eye and told me I was no grandson of his. Not since he called my dreams foolish fantasies, and my art a disgrace to the Alvarez name. How? The word escaped before I could stop it. His heart, mijo. He went peacefully in his sleep. The funeral is Thursday. I know things between you two were complicated, but... Complicated? The laugh that escaped me was bitter, sharp enough to cut glass. He disowned me, Tia. He said I was dead to him. He was proud, Nico. Too proud. But he was still your grandfather. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was 8 years old again, standing in that sterile hospital hallway while a doctor explained that my parents weren't coming home from their business trip. I remembered Eduardo's weathered hands on my shoulders, his voice gruff but steady. "You're an Alvarez now, boy. That means something." It had meant something. Until it didn't. My apartment door burst open without warning. Jamie Park stood there with coffee and determination written across their face, their purple-streaked hair damp from the rain. "The stream starts in 5 hours and you haven't even..." They stopped mid-sentence, taking in my expression. "What happened?" I held up the phone. "My grandfather died." Jamie's face softened immediately. They'd heard enough stories over our 6-year friendship to understand the weight of those words. They knew about the fight, the estrangement, the way Eduardo's rejection had carved a hollow space in my chest that even global fame couldn't fill. "Are you going to the funeral?" I stared at my reflection in the darkened computer screen. Nico Alvarez looked back at me. Not Noctis Nova, not the galaxy-haired avatar who commanded millions of viewers, just me. Tired, alone, and still that scared kid who once desperately wanted his grandfather's approval. I don't know. The flight from Seattle to Los Angeles felt like traveling backward through time. I kept my hood up and sunglasses on, even though the cabin was dimly lit. The last thing I needed was some fan recognizing me and posting about it online. Jamie had insisted on coming with me, but I'd refused. This was something I had to face alone. The taxi dropped me off 3 blocks away from Eduardo's house in East LA. I walked the rest of the way through streets that hadn't changed much in 7 years. The same cracked sidewalks, the same faded murals on brick walls, the same smell of tamales and car exhaust hanging in the warm October air. Each step felt heavier than the last. Eduardo's house sat at the end of Maple Street like a fortress of memories I wasn't ready to storm. The small brick structure with its wrought iron security door and carefully maintained front garden looked exactly as I remembered it. Even the ceramic Virgin Mary statue still stood sentinel beside the front steps, her painted eyes seeming to follow me as I approached. I stood on the porch for a full minute before knocking, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. Tia Rosa opened the door, and immediately I was 8 years old again. She was smaller than I remembered, her silver hair pulled back in the same tight bun she'd worn my entire childhood, but her eyes were the same warm brown, that had dried my tears countless times. "Mio," she whispered, pulling me into a hug that smelled like café con leche and Vicks VapoRub. "You came. I almost didn't." She held me at arm's length, studying my face with the intensity of someone trying to memorize every detail. "You look tired. Too thin. Are you eating?" Quote, "Some things never changed. Even at a funeral, Tia Rosa worried about whether I was eating enough." The house was full of people I half remembered. Distant cousins, family friends, neighbors who used to slip me dulces when Eduardo wasn't looking. They spoke in hushed Spanish, their voices creating a low hum that had once been the soundtrack of my childhood. But now their eyes followed me, with curiosity and judgment, whispers trailing in my wake. "Is that really little Nico? He looks different, skinnier, paler. I heard he does something shameful on the internet now." Eduardo never spoke of him after he left. I kept my head down, following Rosa through the living room toward the kitchen. The walls were still covered with the same family photographs. Eduardo in his army uniform, my parents on their wedding day, me at various ages looking increasingly uncomfortable as I grew older. But what struck me most was what wasn't there. No pictures of me after age 18. It was as if I'd simply vanished from the Alvarez family history. Rosa noticed me staring at the photo wall. Her expression grew sad, almost guilty. "Come," she said quietly, leading me to Eduardo's study. "There's something you need to see." She handed me a leather-bound journal, its edges worn smooth by countless readings. "He wrote in this every night for 40 years, she said, even after you two stopped speaking, especially then." My hands trembled as I took it. The cover was warm, as if it had been recently held. "Read it tonight, Mijo, alone, and maybe you'll understand what the rest of us never could." I sat alone in the budget motel room across town, Eduardo's journal heavy in my lap like a stone. The neon sign outside my window flickered red and blue against the thin curtains, casting dancing shadows across the faded carpet. I'd driven here after the wake, needing distance from the suffocating weight of family expectations and whispered judgments. The journal's first entry was dated 15 years ago, just weeks after my parents died. October 15, 2010, the boy cries every night. Rosa says it's normal, that grief takes time. But I don't know how to comfort him. Maria was always better with tears. I can teach him discipline, respect, how to be a man. But this breaking inside him, I feel useless. Today I found him drawing in his room. Pictures of angels with his mother's face. The detail was remarkable for an 8-year-old. When he saw me looking, he tried to hide them, as if art was something shameful. Maybe I've been too hard on him about practical things. My hands shook as I turned the page. I remembered those drawings, remembered the fear in my child's heart when Eduardo's heavy footsteps approached my bedroom door. October 28, 2010, Nico drew me a picture today, a soldier like I used to be, standing next to a smaller figure he said was him. He wrote, "My hero abuelo," in crayon at the bottom. I put it on the refrigerator, but I wanted to frame it. Rosa laughed at me. "You're going soft, Eduardo." Maybe I am. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. The boy needs structure, yes, but he also needs to know he's loved. Maria always said love was an action, not just a feeling. I need to remember that. I pressed my palm against my eyes, fighting back tears. These weren't the words of the cold, rigid man I remembered. This Eduardo worried, questioned himself, noticed things I never knew he'd seen. December 12th, 2012, Nico is 10 now. Found more drawings under his bed. Characters he calls digital heroes. He says they live in computers, fight battles in cyberspace. I don't understand this world he's creating, but the artistry is undeniable. His teacher says he's gifted. I bought him art supplies for Christmas. Rosa helped me pick them out. I told her they were educational materials. We both knew I was lying. The entries continued, chronicling my teenage years through Eduardo's eyes. He wrote about my awkwardness, my growing passion for digital art, my increasing withdrawal from family dinners. But underneath his frustration was something I'd never recognized at the time. Worry. Fear that he was losing me. September 3, 2016, Nico started high school today. He's changed so much, taller than me now, but fragile somehow. He spends hours on that computer. I bought him for grades. Rosa says he's learning animation, creating stories with moving pictures. Part of me is proud. Part of me is terrified. What kind of future can art provide? What if I fail him like I failed his parents by not being there when they needed protection? He showed me a video today, something called virtual performance. I pretended not to understand, but I watched him light up as he explained it. I haven't seen him that excited about anything in years. Maybe I should try harder to understand his world. Maybe understanding is another form of love. The journal slipped from my hands as I broke down completely. 18 years of suppressed grief pouring out of me like water from a broken dam. All this time, I'd believed Eduardo saw only disappointment when he looked at me. But these pages revealed a man who noticed everything, who worried, who questioned, who tried in his imperfect way to love a grandson he didn't always understand. The last entry in this section was from my high school graduation day. June 15, 2017, Nico graduated valedictorian today. Art scholarship to college. I wanted to tell him how proud I was, but the words got stuck. They always do. Rosa says pride and fear look the same on my face. She's probably right. Tomorrow he leaves for college. I pray I've given him enough strength to chase his dreams, even if I don't understand them, even if I'm too scared to say so. I clutched the journal to my chest and wept for the grandfather I never truly knew. 7 years ago, Eduardo's house, 11:47 p.m. I remember every detail of that night like it's burned into my retinas. I was 22, fresh out of college with a digital arts degree and a heart full of naive hope. I had been secretly developing my VTuber persona for months, creating the avatar that would become Noctis Nova in my cramped apartment while working part-time at a coffee shop. Eduardo sat in his leather recliner, the same one where he'd read me bedtime stories as a child. The television droned with late-night news, but his attention was fixed on the papers spread across his lap, teaching job applications I'd printed to appease him. "Abuelo," I said, my voice trembling with excitement, "I need to show you something." I pulled out my laptop, fingers shaking as I opened the animation files. Months of work culminated in this moment. My digital alter ego, Noctis Nova, rendered in stunning detail. Galaxy blue hair that shifted like starlight, eyes that glowed with cosmic energy, clothing that seemed to be cut from the night sky itself. "This is what I want to do with my life," I said, launching into the presentation I'd rehearsed a dozen times. Virtual performance, digital storytelling. There's a whole community, millions of people who connect through avatars like this. I can make art, tell stories, build something meaningful. Turn it off. Eduardo's voice was ice. His weathered face had gone rigid the way it did when neighborhood kids got too loud outside his window. "But abuelo, if you could just understand." I said, "Turn it off." He slammed his hand on the coffee table, making the lamp jump. "This is what you wasted 4 years of college for? Playing dress-up on a computer? It's not playing dress-up. It's performance art. It's storytelling." "It's foolishness," Eduardo stood, his full height towering over me like a thundercloud. "Your parents died working real jobs, contributing to society. And you want to throw away everything they sacrificed for this fantasy?" The words hit me like physical blows. I watched his face transform from the grandfather who'd raised me into something cold and unrecognizable. "I've arranged interviews at 3 schools," he continued, his voice deadly calm. "You'll teach like I did, or you'll join the military, build character. Serve something bigger than yourself." "This is bigger than myself." I stood too, desperation making me bold. "I can reach people, help them, create communities." "By hiding behind a cartoon?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "By pretending to be someone you're not?" "I'm not pretending. This is who I am." "Then you're no grandson of mine." The silence that followed was deafening. We stood there, 2 feet apart, a universe of misunderstanding between us. "Fine," I whispered, closing the laptop with shaking hands, "if that's how you feel." I walked toward the door, praying he'd call my name, take it back, tell me we could work it out, but Eduardo Alvarez was too proud, and I was too hurt. The last thing I heard before the door closed was the sound of him sinking back into his chair with a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world. The funeral reception took place in Eduardo's backyard, under the same pepper tree where he'd taught me to throw a baseball 15 years ago. Folding tables covered with white plastic cloths held platters of food I recognized from childhood: tamales, pozole, tres leches cake. But everything tasted like cardboard in my mouth. I kept to the shadows, nursing a warm beer and watching relatives. I barely remembered share stories about Eduardo the war hero, Eduardo the dedicated teacher, Eduardo the pillar of the community. No one mentioned Eduardo the grandfather. No one mentioned me. "You're hiding." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The voice belonged to an elderly man with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a crisp white guayabera and carried himself with the straight-backed posture of a soldier. "Carlos Mendoza," he said, extending a weathered hand. "Your grandfather's friend from the war, and after." I shook his hand, trying to place him among my childhood memories. "I'm sorry, I don't really remember." "You wouldn't." Eduardo kept his war stories to himself around family, but he talked about you plenty. My heart clenched. "I doubt that. We hadn't spoken in 7 years. Carlos studied my face with the intensity of someone reading a map. "That's not what I meant. Mind if we sit?" We settled onto 2 lawn chairs beside Rosa's flower garden, away from the crowd. Carlos pulled out his phone and scrolled through his photos with the careful deliberation of someone still learning technology. "Your grandfather came to my house every Sunday for the past 3 years, Carlos said. We'd watch football, play dominoes, complain about our arthritis. But mostly, he'd show me videos on his computer. He found what he was looking for and handed me the phone. My breath caught in my throat. It was a screenshot of one of my live streams from last year, Noctis Nova, in full performance mode. Galaxy hair flowing, as I told a story about finding hope in darkness. But that wasn't what made my hands shake. It was the comment visible at the bottom of the screen. "Proud Abuelo 47. This young man reminds me of my grandson. Same heart, same spirit." "Proud Abuelo 47, Carlos said quietly. "Eduardo's username. He watched every single one of your shows, Nico. Never missed one." I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. "But he said I was dead to him." "Pride is a hell of a thing," Carlos said, taking his phone back. "Makes good men do stupid things. But love finds a way." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, its edges worn soft from handling. "Found this on his nightstand when we cleaned out his room." It was a printed image of Noctis Nova from my most popular performance, the one where I'd talked about forgiveness and family while creating a digital aurora behind my avatar. Someone had written on the back in Eduardo's careful handwriting, "My boy's a star, even if I never said it." He printed this 2 years ago, Carlos continued. Carried it in his wallet for a while, then put it by his bed where he could see it every morning and every night. I couldn't speak. The photograph trembled in my hands like a living thing. "There's more," Carlos said gently. "Last month he asked me to help him write a comment on one of your videos. Something about courage and following your dreams. He wrote it out on paper first, must have drafted it 20 times, but in the end he was too scared to post it." "What did it say?" Carlos smiled sadly. "It said I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was never wrong about loving you." The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. Carlos placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and let me cry for the grandfather who'd loved me in silence, who'd been too proud to bridge the gap between us, but too loving to ever really let go. Back at my motel room, I called Jamie. They answered on the first ring, their voice heavy with concern. "How was the funeral?" "Jamie," I said, my voice cracking, "I need you to fly down here, tonight." "What happened?" I told them about Carlos, about the photo, about Eduardo's secret online presence. Jamie listened in stunned silence. "I'm booking a flight now," they said. "There's more, isn't there?" "There's always more." They arrived at sunrise with their laptop bag and a determination that reminded me why they'd been my anchor through everything. We sat cross-legged on the motel room bed while I explained about the USB drive Rosa had pressed into my hands as I left the reception. "She said Eduardo left specific instructions," I said, turning the small device over in my palms, "only to be opened if something happened to him." Jamie plugged it into their laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as they bypassed the encryption Eduardo had set up. Whatever was on this drive, my grandfather had wanted to make sure only I could access it. "Got it," Jamie said, then paused. "Nico, there are dozens of video files here, all labeled with dates going back 4 years. The first video showed Eduardo sitting at his kitchen table, the same one where he'd helped me with homework as a child. He looked older than I remembered, his hair completely white now, but his eyes held a clarity I'd never seen before. "Hello, Mijo," he said to the camera, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and Rosa finally gave you what I was too cowardly to give you while I was alive." Jamie squeezed my hand as Eduardo continued. "I've been watching you, Nico. Every show, every performance. I created an account, Proud Abuelo 47, because I couldn't stay away. At first, I told myself I was just checking to make sure you were safe, that you weren't making a fool of yourself." He laughed, and the sound was both familiar and foreign. "But then I saw what you were really doing. The way you helped that kid who was being bullied by having Noctis Nova. Tell a story about standing up for yourself. The night you spent 5 hours talking a viewer through their panic attack, never breaking character but somehow making them feel less alone." Eduardo's voice grew thick with emotion. "I realized I'd been so worried about you having a respectable career that I'd missed the point entirely. You weren't just making art, Micho. You were making a difference." The video showed him pulling out a folder thick with printed comments from my streams, messages from fans whose lives had been touched by Noctis Nova's stories. "I printed these," he said, holding up the papers. "Every thank you note, every message about how your work helps someone feel less alone. I have boxes of them upstairs." Jamie and I exchanged shocked glances. Eduardo had been collecting evidence of my impact, documenting the very thing he'd once dismissed as worthless. "I was wrong about everything," Eduardo continued, his voice breaking. "I was so afraid of losing you to a dream that I lost you to my fear instead. I should have celebrated your courage instead of questioning it. I should have been your biggest supporter instead of your biggest obstacle." He looked directly into the camera, and for a moment it felt like he was looking directly at me. "I'm proud of you, Nico. I've been proud of you every single day since you walked out that door. I just didn't know how to swallow my pride long enough to tell you." The recording ended with Eduardo wiping tears from his eyes and whispering, "I love you, mijo. I always have." I collapsed against Jamie's shoulder and wept for all the years we'd lost, for all the words that had gone unspoken, and for the grandfather who'd learned to love me from a distance but had run out of time to close the gap. The reception had moved inside Eduardo's house as evening settled over East L.A. Family members clustered in small groups, their voices a familiar symphony of Spanish and English that had once been the soundtrack of my childhood. I stood in the doorway holding my phone, watching them share memories of a man they thought they knew completely. Jamie stood beside me, having driven straight from the airport, still carrying their laptop bag. "You don't have to do this," they whispered. "Yes, I do," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. He couldn't find the courage to reach out, but I can. Rosa noticed me first, her eyes widening as she took in my determined expression. She'd seen that look before. It was the same one Eduardo wore when he'd made up his mind about something. "Familia," I called out, my voice cutting through the conversation. "I need to tell you something." The room gradually quieted. Cousin Miguel set down his beer. Tia Carmen paused mid-sentence. Even the children playing in the corner sensed the shift and turned to look at me. "You all knew Eduardo as a teacher, a veteran, a good man who served his community," I began, my heart hammering against my ribs. But there's something about him you didn't know, something about both of us. I pulled out my phone and connected it to Eduardo's old television, the same one where we'd watch Sunday football games when I was small. The screen flickered to life, showing the Noctis Nova logo, a swirling galaxy that had become my signature. Gasps rippled through the room. Cousin Miguel dropped his beer. "For the past 7 years, I've been performing under this avatar," I said, watching their faces cycle through confusion, recognition, and shock. "My name online is Noctis Nova. Maybe some of you have heard of me." Tia Carmen's hand flew to her mouth. You're that famous one? The one with millions of followers?" I nodded, then reached up and removed the simple black mask I'd worn to hide my identity at the funeral. The room erupted in whispers. "Eduardo disowned me when I chose this path," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "He said I was no grandson of his. I believed him for 7 years. I thought he was ashamed of me." I played a clip from Eduardo's video diary, just 30 seconds of him saying how proud he was, how wrong he'd been. The room fell silent except for the sound of Eduardo's voice filling the space where he'd once forbidden me to speak my dreams. "He's been watching my performances for 4 years," I said as the clip ended. "Every single one. He created an account called Proud Abuelo 47 just to follow my work. He printed comments from fans, kept them in boxes upstairs. He was my biggest supporter, and I never knew." Rosa stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "He asked me every week if I'd heard from you. Every single week for 7 years. I told him to call you himself, but he was too proud," I finished. "And I was too hurt." I held up the photograph Carlos had given me, Eduardo's handwriting clearly visible on the back. "This was on his nightstand. My boy's a star, even if I never said it." The room was completely silent now. Even the children had stopped playing. "I lost 7 years with him because we were both too stubborn to admit we were wrong," I said, my voice breaking. "Don't make the same mistake with the people you love. Say the words while you can still say them." Rosa crossed the room and pulled me into a fierce embrace. "He loved you every day," she whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Every single day." One by one, family members approached me, some with apologies, others with awe, all of them seeing me clearly for the first time in years. 3 weeks after the funeral, I sat in my Seattle studio, surrounded by concept art and storyboards that covered every available surface. The space felt different now, not like a hiding place, but like a workshop where something important was being born. Jamie burst through the door carrying coffee and a stack of contracts, their energy infectious as always. "Netflix wants to meet," they announced, setting down the papers with a flourish. "Apparently, the story about you and Eduardo has gone viral. Hashtag ProudAbuelo47 is trending worldwide." I looked up from my drawing tablet where I'd been sketching Eduardo in military uniform, trying to capture the strength in his weathered hands. "What kind of meeting?" "Documentary special. They want to tell the whole story. Your journey as Noctis Nova, the estrangement, the reunion that never happened in life but happened after death." Jamie's voice grew softer. "They want to call it Silent Pride, a grandfather's goodbye." The title hit me like a physical blow. I set down my stylus and rubbed my eyes. That's perfect." Over the past weeks, I'd been working on something I'd never attempted before. A hybrid animation that would blend Noctis Nova's digital world with real footage from Eduardo's video diary. The project felt sacred, like I was building a bridge between 2 universes that had never been allowed to touch. My phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. "Mijo, you need to see the garage." Quote, I'd been avoiding Eduardo's house since the funeral, but Rosa's urgency prompted Jamie and me to drive down the next day. What we found in Eduardo's garage took my breath away. Boxes, dozens of them, stacked floor to ceiling and labeled with dates. Each one contained printed screenshots of my performances, fan letters people had sent to Noctis Nova, articles about virtual performance and digital art that Eduardo had researched to understand my world. "He started collecting these 4 years ago," Rosa explained, pulling out a folder marked Nico's Awards and Recognition. Inside were printouts of every achievement, every milestone, every positive review my work had received. He'd spend hours every week organizing them, reading them, over and over. Jamie whistled low, pulling out a thick binder labeled Fan Letters Impact Stories. It contained hundreds of messages from viewers whose lives had been touched by Noctis Nova's content. Eduardo had sorted them by category: depression/mental health support, LGBTQ+ youth helped, artistic inspiration, and community building. He was building a case, I realized, my voice barely a whisper. All this time, he was documenting that what I do matters. In the corner, covered by a dusty tarp, sat Eduardo's old computer. Jamie booted it up and found a folder simply titled, For Nico. Inside were dozens of half-written emails, started and deleted over the years. Each one began the same way. Mijo, I was wrong. One draft, dated just 2 months before his death, was longer than the rest. I've been watching your work for years now, and I finally understand what you tried to show me. You didn't abandon our family's values. You found a new way to live them. Service, community, helping others. You do all of these things. I just couldn't see it, because I was looking with the wrong eyes. I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. I just forgot how to say it. I sank into Eduardo's old desk chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his silent love. This wasn't just collection. It was documentation of a transformation, proof that even the most stubborn hearts could learn to see differently. He was preparing for this moment, Rosa said gently. He knew that someday, when his pride stopped getting in the way, he'd need evidence to show you how he really felt. Jamie squeezed my shoulder. So what do we do with all this? Quote, I looked around the garage filled with my grandfather's secret shrine to my career and knew exactly what we had to do. We build the bridge he couldn't build himself. The documentary aired on a Tuesday night in November, exactly 1 month after Eduardo's passing. I watched it alone in my studio, surrounded by the concept art for my tribute project, as millions of viewers around the world learned about Proud Abuelo 47 and the grandfather who loved in silence. Within hours, my email inbox exploded with messages I never expected to receive. The first one that stopped me cold came from an address I didn't recognize, magarcia.teacher@eastlaschools.org. Dear Nico, it began. My name is Maria Garcia, and I teach 3rd grade at Roosevelt Elementary, the same school where your grandfather was principal for 20 years. I wanted you to know that Eduardo talked about you all the time in the teacher's lounge, especially in the last few years. My hands trembled as I continued reading. He never used your stage name, but he'd tell us about his grandson, the artist, who was changing lives through stories. He showed us clips of your work, explaining how digital art could reach kids who felt invisible. Because of him, our school started an after-school digital arts program. We have 30 kids enrolled now, many of them shy or struggling students who found their voice through animation and virtual performance. Your grandfather may not have told you directly, but he made sure your influence lived on in ways you never knew. I stared at the screen, tears blurring my vision. Eduardo had been advocating for my work while I thought he was ashamed of it. More emails poured in throughout the week. A youth counselor in Phoenix wrote about how she'd been using Noctis Nova's content in therapy sessions with teenage clients, and how Eduardo had reached out to her months ago asking for resources about art therapy. A father in Michigan explained how Eduardo had commented on one of his posts about his son's anxiety, recommending my streams about overcoming fear. But the message that broke me completely came from a 12-year-old named Sophia. Hi, Noctis. My art teacher showed us your documentary and said we could write to you. I wanted to tell you that I draw every day now because of your videos. My abuela says drawing isn't a real job, but your story made me think maybe she'll change her mind someday like your abuelo did. I made a picture of you and your grandpa together in space. I hope you like it. Attached was a crayon drawing of Noctis Nova floating among stars, reaching out to shake hands with a figure in military uniform. At the bottom, In careful child's handwriting, families love different but love same. I called Rosa immediately. There's more, she said before I could speak. The community center wants to create a permanent exhibit, Eduardo's military service next to your digital art. They're calling it Legacy, Old and New, and the high school where you graduated. They want to start a scholarship in both your names for students pursuing non-traditional careers. Rosa, I had no idea. He planted seeds everywhere, mijo, every conversation, every interaction. He was proud of you to anyone who would listen, even when he couldn't say it to your face. A week later, I stood at the podium in Roosevelt Elementary's auditorium, looking out at an audience of teachers, parents, and students. Eduardo's portrait sat on an easel beside the stage, next to a blown-up screenshot of Noctis Nova. My grandfather taught me that service comes in many forms, I began, my voice steady for the first time in months. He served his country in war, served his community as an educator, and in the end he served love by learning to see the world through different eyes. A little girl in the front row raised her hand. Are you going to keep making videos? I smiled, thinking of Eduardo's boxes of fan letters, his careful documentation of lives changed through digital stories. Yes, I said. Because stories have power, and my grandfather taught me that power should always be used to help others, even if it takes time to understand how. After the presentation, an elderly teacher approached me with tears in her eyes. Eduardo would be so proud, she whispered. You've given him the greatest gift, the chance to be remembered not just for his own service, but for raising someone who continues that tradition in their own way. I looked up at Eduardo's portrait, and for the first time since his death, I felt his presence not as an absence, but as a foundation upon which I could build something beautiful. 6 months later, I stood in the wings of the Pasadena Community Theater, my heart pounding, as the opening credits of Silent Pride: A Grandfather's Goodbye played on the screen. The theater was packed. Rosa sat in the front row next to Jamie, while Carlos Mendoza had flown in from Arizona with 3 other veterans who'd known Eduardo. Teachers from Roosevelt Elementary filled an entire section, and scattered throughout the audience were faces I recognized from my online community, fans who'd traveled from across the country to witness this moment. The film I'd spent months creating was a hybrid masterpiece that still amazed me. It wove together Eduardo's video diary footage with animated sequences where Noctis Nova and a digital version of my grandfather met in a starry realm between worlds. In the animation, they spoke all the words that had gone unsaid in life, bridging the gap that pride and fear had created. As the final scene played, Eduardo's avatar embracing Noctis Nova while galaxies swirled around them, I heard sniffles throughout the theater. On screen, their last exchange echoed in the silence. I should have told you I was proud, Eduardo's digital voice said. You did tell me, Noctis Nova replied, his galaxy hair shimmering with tears. You just used a different language. I finally learned how to listen. The screen faded to black, and for a moment, the theater was completely silent. Then someone in the back started clapping. The sound spread like wildfire until every person in the audience was on their feet, applause thundering through the space like a storm. I walked onto the stage, no longer hiding behind masks or avatars, just Nico Alvarez standing in the spotlight. The ovation continued for what felt like hours, and I saw tears on faces throughout the crowd, young and old, strangers and family, all united by a story about love that transcends understanding. When the applause finally died down, a teenage girl near the front raised her hand. What would you say to your grandfather now if you could? I looked up at the projection booth where Eduardo's portrait hung, illuminated by stage lights, his serious expression somehow softer in the glow. I'd tell him that love doesn't always have to be spoken to be heard, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the theater. Sometimes it's in the things we collect, the stories we tell about each other when we think no one's listening, the way we change our minds and grow even when we're scared. After the screening, as people slowly filed out sharing their own stories of family misunderstandings and reconciliations, a young boy approached me with his grandmother. Mijo, she said in accented English. "Your story. It made me call my grandson. We hadn't spoken in 2 years because I didn't understand his music career. We're having dinner tomorrow." I knelt down to the boy's level. He was maybe 8 years old, the same age I'd been when Eduardo took me in. "I want to make videos like you," he whispered shyly, "but Abuela says it's not a real job." His grandmother's face softened as she looked between us. "Maybe," she said slowly, "maybe I need to learn more about this digital world." Later that night, I sat alone in Eduardo's backyard under the pepper tree, looking up at the stars. The house had been sold, but Rosa had given me one last night to say goodbye. Eduardo's dog tags hung from a chain around my neck, the only thing I'd asked to keep from his belongings. I pulled out my phone and started a new video recording, not as Noctis Nova, but as myself. "Hi, everyone. This is Nico Alvarez, and I wanted to share something with you. For 7 years, I thought my grandfather had given up on me. I spent all that time trying to prove I was worthy of love I thought I'd lost. But I learned something incredible recently. Love doesn't disappear just because we can't see it. Sometimes it works in secret, planting seeds in places we never expect them to grow." I looked up at the stars that Noctis Nova had always called home. So if you're watching this and you're estranged from someone you love, don't wait for them to make the first move. Don't wait until it's too late. Pride heals, but regret is forever. I ended the recording and posted it immediately, then whispered to the night sky, "Thank you, Abuelo. For everything you did, and everything you couldn't do, I love you too." A shooting star streaked across the darkness, and for one perfect moment, I felt Eduardo's presence, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a foundation of love upon which I could build whatever came next. The Alvarez legacy lived on, transformed but unbroken, in the space between tradition and innovation, where all the best stories are born. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.